Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and specifically, welcome back to my masterclass video on the tier 10 Italian heavy tank, the Rinoceronte. Now, the masterclass series goes above and beyond what my regular tank reviews do to try and help those of you out there who are either trying to improve your win rate, maybe try and get your third mark of excellence, maybe get your first ace tanker in the vehicle, or maybe you just really love the tank and you want to have a few ideas about how a muppet like me would set it up. The Rinoceronte is an absolute enigma of a tank. When I first played this vehicle, I absolutely hated it. I couldn't get over the terrible damage per minute. It really ended up frustrating me. And it took me a while to figure out how to play this tank. And then recently, I've been actually having some of my better games in any of my tier 10 heavy tanks in this one. And today, I'm going to let you know why. So firstly, let's take a look to see how the Rinoceronte is being played throughout the entire player base. We can see that even with the buffs that this vehicle received recently, where Wargaming improved its reverse speed and its turret armor a little bit, its win ratio is still towards the middle bottom of tier 10 tank tree heavy tanks at 48.19. But interestingly, this isn't for lack of damage, because when we order it by damage, the Rinoceronte is very much within the top half of the field. So it looks like players are, well, they're not failing to do damage, maybe they're failing to do it in the right place, and that's why the Rinoceronte has not been working out for them. So the main thing that holds the Rinoceronte back is the damage per minute. As with most auto-reloaders, the deeper that you go into the magazine, the worse your damage per minute gets, and the Rinoceronte is no exception. When this vehicle is empty, it takes 20 seconds to reload a single 490 alpha damage shell, which improves to 15.7 if you already have 2 shells loaded and you're just trying to top up the third. Now keep in mind, this worst in class damage per minute of less than 1900, which would be awful at tier 9, let alone at tier 10, actually becomes as bad as 1470 if you are firing this tank while its magazine is empty. Accordingly, you should try and do everything that you can in this vehicle to only fire when it is necessary and when it's advantageous to do so. As quite often, dumping your magazine out, which is a very tempting thing to do when you have 490 alpha damage, can end up with you unable to recover and play for the rest of the battle. Or, more importantly, lets the enemy know that you're vulnerable and they might end up pushing you. In addition to this weakness, the Rinoceronte has really bad dispersion on its gun when it is moving and when it is turning the tank. So crew skills like snapshot and vertical stabilizers being absolutely mandatory on this tank can help that out. Also, while the vehicle's armor has been buffed and it's okay against standard rounds, as soon as your enemies load gold, the vehicle just becomes really green. Nevertheless, this shouldn't mean that you don't try to use as much of your gun depression in this vehicle as you can, because when you do, and you point your gun specifically directly towards your opponent to prevent this from being a vulnerability, then you're actually very strong indeed, even against 325 millimeters of heat pen. Outside of these weaknesses, there are so many strengths to highlight. The vehicle is not exactly slow with an impressive power to weight ratio, it's very accurate, it's got a great selection of ammunition with impressive shell velocity on its APCR rounds of 1452, good heat rounds which provide flexibility, which have received a buff with regards to their shell velocity, so all of you who only want to load gold in this tank are going to have a better deal at sniping, and great high explosive rounds at 640 alpha damage and 127 millimeters of penetration. Although you can struggle being able to actually get those HE rounds into the vehicle unless you have intuition, which can be very awkward as this tank only has 3 crew members and 2 of those are loaders. Until the next patch, if intuition is going to be a 1-person skill. So the key with the Rinoceronte is actually mitigating a lot of the weaknesses that the vehicle has, both with its crew, its equipment, and its field mods. With the crew, as I mentioned, it's absolutely mandatory to have smooth ride on this vehicle, which will improve the dispersion of the tank, which is awful when you're moving. Otherwise, even with the awesome aim time that this vehicle has, it just keeps blooming out. Now, if you have the economy on your account and you don't mind spending 10,000 credits per battle, you can actually add to this by using a directive which doubles the effect of smooth ride once you've got it trained to 100%. And this can allow you to have 8% reduced dispersion when you're moving, which can really help you to quickly react to your opponents. However, I would put this in the try-hard bracket, as adding an extra 10,000 credits per battle can really break the bank. Your commander is very important on the Rinoceronte because there will be a lot of pressure on them. They have to fulfill 3 roles on this tank: the commander, the radio operator, and the loader. Accordingly, I would recommend finding at least 1 crew member with 0 skill for your commander on this vehicle so you can get situational awareness and recon quickly, because the vehicle doesn't have the best base view range of 390, and even with a field mod you can't really get it up to a super high level. And trust me, you're not going to want to waste an equipment slot on coated optics on this tank. Talking about equipment, I feel like this tank has a one size fits all. I like to use vents, turbo, and vertical stabilizers. This helps you to have the forward speed in addition to the reverse speed on the tank. And my second build on the vehicle will be using a durability device instead of the turbo, while still making use of the vents bonus slot for when things are going to be truly close quarters combat. And for field mods, it's real simple on this tank. Firstly, you want to take all-terrain suspension, which will improve the ground resistances on the vehicle, helping the mobility. Then you want to take accuracy, which further improves one of the vehicle's most impressive statistics. You want to take periscope electric drive, which will improve your view range, which will mean that when you have a very good crew and a premium consumable, you can actually get to 465 meters view range on this tank. And if you can't afford a premium consumable, you're still going to get to 444 meters, which is pretty much the spotting cap distance. Next, there's a real great field mod on the Rinoceronte, and that is taking focus on firepower. This will improve the reloads of pretty much all of the shells by half a second. And the benefit of that half a second really can't be overstated. That can often allow you to not have to fire early and waste a shot, as well as all of the progress that you were building up towards the shell that you really wanted to fire, giving you this compound effect, almost as if you're starting an avalanche. With the Rinoceronte, one missed shot or one shot where you were forced to fire early can then result in devastating consequences, with your damage per minute just getting lower and lower and lower to a point that you can never truly recover. And so doing everything that you can to improve your damage per minute on this tank with the premium consumable, the vents, the focus on the firepower, and the brothers in arms skill can actually end up with this vehicle having not a great damage per minute, but not one that's so bad that you can't really impact the battle. Now, it should be mentioned that this focus on firepower will actually reduce your reverse speed by 3 kilometers an hour. And before the Rinoceronte buff, this would have been absolutely horrific, because even with a turbo, your reverse speed was down to, I think, 12 kilometers an hour. However, now with the buff, even while taking the focus on firepower, with a turbo inside a mobility slot, you can still go at 15 backwards, which is more than enough. But be warned, if you take the durability device in a close quarters combat fight, don't expect to be going backwards too quickly. And the final field mod on the Rinoceronte is a bit of a tricky conundrum. As this vehicle's intraclip reload is 4 seconds, it doesn't really matter if you reduce the bloom after firing or if you increase the bloom after firing, because 4 seconds is more than enough to be able to fully aim the next shot with the vehicle's impressive aim time of 1.94 with the way that I've set it up. Consequently, the decision comes down as to whether you want to trade 6% of your aiming time to increase your hit points by 2%, and for me, that's a decision that I would want to take. That means I can get 2,100 hit points rather than going down to 2,020. And personally, I'm more than willing to trade those extra 0.2 seconds on the aim time for the 80 hit points that I gain for it. So now that you know everything there is to know about the Rinoceronte, let's jump into some games. So firstly, we are going to be assaulting on steps. And yeah, boohoo, it's always nicer to be able to defend on steps than it is to assault, especially when you're in a vehicle that doesn't really have the damage per minute to overwhelm its opponents. Nevertheless, what we're going to see here is that you can find positions to make a vehicle that has flexible gun depression work on a map like this, and also how to control the situation. And that is the most important thing that you are going to learn in any of your auto-reloading heavy tanks, but especially the biggest of the auto-reloading heavy tanks, the Rinoceronte. So it's crazy for me that we are now 6 seconds into the battle, and even with a near min-maxed Rinoceronte like this, the only way that you could get a better reload than that is if you were to use bond vents and not regular vents. It takes 40 seconds to fully reload this vehicle. And while the magazine is impressive, 1,000 470 damage in the magazine. You know, a T-57 Heavy is kind of reloading twice by then, and that will have 3,200 in its magazine. So in this kind of a situation, what we're going to do is we're going to just try and find our sneaky shots into the 121B and make sure we keep our gun facing directly forwards. I don't really want to repair my gun right now because I'm worried that if I get tracked, then I'll be completely destroyed, as I'm not using the durability device on this tank. But you'll notice that I'm going to use this rock to hide my lower plate, and I'm not going to be too tempted to fire out multiple shots. I'm just going to fire one, reload, and try and keep my damage per minute good. And in this situation, I'm thinking, well, maybe I should probably repair my gun in this scenario. But I guess I just really don't want to end up getting caught. And even with a broken gun on this vehicle, it's not the end of the world. But it looks like I finally decide that, yeah, I kind of want to have that gun to be flexible here. So I decide that just enough is enough with regards to waiting for this Jagdpanzer to do something. And this is where the Rinoceronte just feels wonderful. That .33 base accuracy, which you will improve with Brothers in Arms, a premium consumable, and with the field mod accuracy that you've hopefully taken. It'd be an awful idea to go the other way. It allows you to just be so consistent when you're dealing with your opponents. Although no tank is really so consistent that you can accurately hit the weak point of a moving Jagdpanzer in that kind of a scenario. But you can see that as long as we're only firing one shell, and then we're just taking our time to be able to reload, we can just consistently get our shots against our opponents. And now here is the main thing. The main thing is that you do not want to fire 3, because as soon as I do, what's stopping my opponents from pushing? Now, I guess in this kind of a scenario, the fact that I've got some friends over towards my left, that's definitely going to help me out. But I've seen so many Rinoceronte players bounce shells or just fire the shells too early without realizing that not only are they lowering their damage per minute, they're also making them vulnerable to a counterplay. And this is what the Rinoceronte has to do. It has to fire one by one, being a tank of opportunity, and because its reload is so long, you will reset your vision very easily if you're trying to avoid being detected, or you're trying to fight from a bush, or trying to fight over a ridge line. And also in these kind of close quarter scenarios, people just seem to get bored of the Rinoceronte. I swear players' attention spans in World of Tanks is roughly about 10 seconds. Although, you know, with social media and presence like myself, I wonder if I'm destroying the attention spans of the youth of the next generation, possibly. Well, at least it's benefiting me in World of Tanks, as these Super Conquerors seem to just forget about me. So the turret armor buff on this tank is just absolutely lovely. Now you can kind of get into this position where your opponents aren't able to just whiff gold rounds at your turret like they were previously. And there we go, ricocheting off the Conqueror round there. And we're just controlling here. And our gun handling with the vertical stabilizers, and also with the smooth ride and the snapshot that I've taken, which I further improved with the directive, with the fabulous aim time on the tank, still means that you can get your shots in. And so it's all about looking for opportunities, looking for your opponents, shot selection, trying to find the right place to shoot. And it's not like another tank where you can take chancy shots. You've got to have that confidence in your aim, and you've got to have that confidence in your knowledge of your opponents and their weak points to make your shots count. One of the things that's interesting about the Rinoceronte, and this is a funny statistic that the awesome Tomato GG can get, is it actually has the best penetration, or was it the hit value, of any of the heavy tanks. And so this is an interesting scenario. Here we can see that I'm not going to fire. The Foshby seems to have overplayed this corner. And I'm not going to fire again. I was hoping they were going to burn, but unfortunately they used their fire extinguisher. And I'm just going to wait. Why? Why would I fire? You know, maybe I could steal the kill from the 260. Why don't I just wait? And then I can be fully loaded in that scenario. Now, unfortunately, I've had such a good game here, 5,300, that I've actually run out of AP rounds. So now I might as well blaze out these two shots. Oh, that was a bit of a misplay there at the Super Conqueror tracks. I might as well fire this extra one. I wanted to fully aim that one to make sure I didn't get caught. Unfortunately, we can see the Super Conqueror just put a gold round right through my lower plate. And now I'm in that awkward scenario of look how long this reload is. I'm pretty sure I'd be reloaded now. That's the kind of Rinoceronte reload vibe that I've got so far. And this is pain. Having those super long reloads. Either because you fired all of your APCR rounds and then you need to start loading heat rounds. Or I guess if you want to be able to switch a magazine. Or, more often, bad Rinoceronte players who will whiff shots at their opponents, or they'll just fire all of them out when they're really excited and not realize that they have to hold their shots for if people like the Foch B are going to push around the corner. And I was just fully in control of that situation. And again, that is the word of this video. And that is the word of the Rinoceronte. Although you can see there in that kind of a scenario, why wouldn't I dump out the second round to secure the kill on the Conqueror? I feel like I've got more than enough time to be able to get some extra shells. Now, a lot of you might not have that, should we say, you might not have hundreds of games in auto-reloaders, and you want QuickyBaby to just tell you when to fire. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to sit on your shoulder and do that for you all individually. That would be kind of creepy if I was able to do that. But if you want a rule of thumb as to what you should do, I feel that I will only fire in an Italian auto-reloader under two conditions. One, am I safe? Will I be able to reload before somebody comes in and goes all in against me? If the answer is yes, then you go to the second decision. Do I think that this shell is like a 75 or 80% chance that it's going to be able to not only hit, but also penetrate my opponent? If the answer is yes, I'll probably fire, because a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. But the problem in World of Tanks is there seem to be a lot of birds and a lot of bushes, and it can all get a little bit confusing as to when you should try and commit to those scenarios. So round 2 for the Rinoceronte, and we are playing on mines. And with the great power to weight ratio that this vehicle has, and the lack of medium and light tanks that the enemy team have, I think it's a good opportunity to try and pressure the hill. The only problem is that because the Rinoceronte takes so long to reload, we might not even have our third shell reloaded by the time we get there. And that can always be a predicament. Literally, we don't even have our second shell loaded as we're just about to crest this ridge line. And so, do I fire now and absolutely trash my DPM? Do I not fire now? I'm actually going to hold it. Because, again, if I had fired and I only have one shell left, maybe I low roll on the EBR and I don't have that opportunity. And then, even if I've killed the EBR, which to all intents and purposes I would do with my 490 Alpha, then I'd be empty, and then I wouldn't have the opportunity to be able to dump down on all of the tanks below me in this scenario. And so, it is really an enigma in this tank, and it's something that you will take hundreds of games to be able to get a vibe for. And here we can see against the STR V103B, I just want to go for the kill. And look at that! We roll for 397. How ridiculous is that after we were just talking about the theoretical event of low rolling against the EBR? Well, if I had, that EBR would have been able to shoot me 2 additional times before I was able to reload the 20 seconds that this vehicle has when the magazine is dry. And so, even with these hundreds of games that I have, not only in the Rinoceronte, but in vehicles like the Bisonte, or even this vehicle's predecessor, the Progetto 66, I'm still not always, I guess, making the 100% correct decision. Now I want to talk briefly about the shell compensation. You hear the beeping that it makes. If the shell is beeping and then you fire early, then you get half of the compensation for your next reload. And so, what you want to make sure you never do in the Rinoceronte is fire if your shell is not beeping at you, if that makes sense. Because what that means is that that's a shell that's already getting compensation because you fired the previous shot early. And if you fired the previous shot early and you fire again, you will get 0 compensation for the next shell. Accordingly, you can go from being maybe a few seconds away from having your second shell loaded to literally having no shells in the vehicle with no compensation and a 20-second reload for that third shell. So be very careful in that scenario and use that shell compensation mechanic to make sure that you are using that to make a more informed decision about whether it's actually right to drop the hammer on the target. Again, this whole blooming masterclass video can almost be summarized in the term control. And I'm trying to give you all as many examples as possible of situations where, should we say, my control has hopefully enabled us to get through the situation better than otherwise we would have. And I think that's the big difference between Rinoceronte drivers, because it really surprises me that this vehicle has such a bad win ratio. And I think it's because it's probably one of the more tricky tanks to play at tier 10. But I think that if you can master it, I genuinely think that it probably becomes one of the best tanks at tier 10. And I think that also setting this thing up with vents, a premium consumable, brothers in arms, and importantly that field mod to improve the rate of fire by 3%, allows it to transcend from being a vehicle that's always trying to catch up to being a vehicle that can actually start to dictate the pace of the combat. And when you've got a vehicle like this that is always meant to be one that is slightly behind and is hopefully kind of, trying to keep up and control the scenario, to being one that actually tells the enemy tanks, look, this is how it's going to go down, then when you look at all of the other statistics that the Rinoceronte has, it starts to become a very formidable vehicle. And that's why it's become actually one of my favorite vehicles to play, not only on my main account, but also on my free-to-play account. However, ladies and gents, boys and girls, I'm making it sound as if it's all sunshine and rainbows and lollipops in this tank. Let me clarify, it's really not. It's really not. But that's more of my opinion from my tank review, rather than this video, which is specifically to try and help you out with how to perfect your play in a masterclass. So we'll see that we just managed to kill 2 tanks with 2 shots. We wait perfectly for just half a second to be able to get that extra shell in, and then that means that instead of having to start reloading this shell, we're actually reloading the extra one. And that is hopefully going to allow us to have at least 2, if not 3 shells to be able to go after the 60 TP. And it really is as simple as that in the Rinoceronte, that your decision to either fire early or to not can end up with you then not having the damage per minute to be able to succeed later on. Like, for example, while I did just secure my 5th kill against the 60 TP in that scenario, do I now have any damage per minute to be able to go after these tanks? Would it have been a better play? Oh, as I get shoved around the corner there. My bad. Sorry, Chieftain, I didn't mean to block you in that scenario, but he really wants to be able to get at that M6Y. Was firing at that 60 TP meaning that I don't get like an additional 2 shells that I could have dumped into the other tanks, where if I was going for my 3rd mark of excellence, maybe I could have done full damage shots to them, or maybe I could have been able to pick up 2 kills on the other tanks instead of firing 1 in the 60 TP, which ended up with me getting back into a position where it was hard to catch up. But all of these scenarios that I've shown you so far in the Rinoceronte have been very easy situations to control. Why don't I show you one just from a couple of days ago where we were in a very precarious situation on Corellia. So here we find ourselves on Corellia, and I've just decided to push the enemy base early to try and draw them back and to try and deal with the enemy team. Now, I'd like to ask you all, how would you handle this situation? Pause the video, or if you're really quick, just think about it. What would you do? What do you do in a Rinoceronte in this situation? You've low-rolled the first shot on the STR-VS1, which now means that you've got maybe a 3 out of 10 chance of being able to kill them in a single shot. How are you going to then deal with the Borsig on your left, a vehicle that will be able to deal with you? Before then, you could reload your 3 shells, which is going to take 42 seconds. They're going to finish you off and take all of your hit points. What is the play for an Italian auto-reloader in this scenario? Because I'll show you what my decision was in this play. And that is, firstly, to realize that firing in this situation would be a complete disaster. I would then never be able to have the damage per minute to fight back and get my way through this situation. So instead, we're going to hold tough. And what we're going to do is focus the vehicle that we know that we've got our best chance of dealing with another shot. We get a low roll, but that's okay, because we can turn our tank into a weapon as well. We trade 35 hit points there to be able to deal with the Borsig. Now I look at the Char Future 4, and I notice that the Char Future 4 is low on health, and I'll be able to focus them down if they come after me. Might as well fire 1 shot at the Borsig, not focus the Char in that scenario, as they actually get dealt with by my opponents. And in this situation now, I can reverse away from the Leopard prototype, and I can be able to get my armor towards the Scorpion G, finish off the Borsig, and now try to reset the engagement, getting away from the Scorpion, who's shooting me in that location, and resetting, and then hopefully we have a chance to be able to go after the Leopard prototype. Now you'll notice that even though the enemy team have got more hit points than us, we're up by 2 tanks, and we can see that our friend, the BZ-176, is going to come in to be able to reinforce. And now, hopefully, we can avoid for just a little bit more, be able to reload. Not we're going to fire here, we're still going to reload because they got 1,700 hit points, and dealing 980 to them isn't really going to matter too much in this scenario. If I do 980, the BZ still has to high roll, or at least roll even, to be able to take out the Leopard. However, now we've got 3, so it's a nice easy scenario for us. We're not going to leave the cap circle because I didn't want to int the game away, but seeing how the BZ actually left the cap circle there, I'm going to go forwards to be able to finish off the Leopard prototype. Unfortunately, I'm going to take one there from the Object 268 version 4, and in this scenario, I'm actually going to fire early because I feel safe against the 268 version 4, and also, you'll notice that I actually switched to heat. And by switching to heat there, you can actually get yourself a faster reload when you're switching. And this is one of the most high-level things that you can do in an Italian auto-reloader. If you find yourself with 1 shell loaded, and you're more than halfway loaded towards the second shell, if you dab the shell that you want to switch to once, and then you fire before you've fully loaded the second shell, you will start to load the shell that you dabbed once. In this case, I wanted a heat round to deal with the Object 268 version 4, and then that means that we get a quick reload of that extra shot. And we have the extra shell for possible bad RNG against that 268 version 4. And that's also why you're saving shells. You're not just saving shells for those possible scenarios where you low roll or to be able to increase your damage per minute. You're also saving those shells because bad RNG happens, and we missed 1 shot into the 268 version 4's lower plate, but luckily, because we had the second one, we were prepared to finish them off. And so, the Rinoceronte, we actually ended up creating a bit of a graveyard around us here, with 5 different tanks finished off. Sure, I got some help from some friends, but this engagement is the perfect example of the awareness that, well, you're not going to develop immediately. Hopefully, I can sow a few seeds that when you find yourself in scenarios like this, to try and create game plans to mitigate this tank's biggest weakness, which is its damage per minute, and possibly turn the fight into your favor. And if you do this, then the results will speak for themselves. You'll increase your damage per minute, you'll increase your damage per game, you'll increase your win ratio, and hopefully you'll end up with 3 little tanks on your barrel. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for my Rinoceronte masterclass. I really hope you enjoy these in-depth videos. I know they're not for everyone, but if you want to see more of them, then make sure you let me know in the comments, and also by giving the video a like. But if you hated the video, also let me know by giving it a thumbs down. And also, let me know in the comments what you think about the Rinoceronte. Do you think it's an absolute awful vehicle? Or, like me, did you give it a try and ended up kind of falling in love with it a little bit? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.